Hello, my friends. Our topic is the asteroid Pallas. Straight away, I'm going to give you the meaning of Pallas according to our research, and I've got it right up here. Pallas brings innocent and pure talents into expression in the world. This is a fundamental challenge for everyone. We have talents. We have things that we're good at. We have gifts that we have. And often we would like to develop. We would like to bring them out into the world. And of course, that's a challenge. How do you bring those things that you have a gift for? Those gifts are really, that's a perfect word for it. They're just, you've got them. And now you want to develop it, you want to express it, and you want it to circulate out in the world. That process of bringing, and it's not necessarily just the person in the chart, but anyone's, bringing someone's talents, developing them, and having them circulate out into the world. It's a delicate process, and that delicate process is what Pallas is interested in. It's delicate. Why do I say it's delicate? Because it depends on what people want, what they're doing. How does your gift fit in? How do you negotiate it? How do you might say, market it? How do you present it? You have to succeed, you often have to do it in a very appropriate, sensitive way to make it fit together. So that's the perspective of Pallas. Anyway, you might have a different idea about it, but that's the perspective of Pallas, which is not the only perspective. But the interest of Pallas is how to take these talents, develop them, and share them and integrate them. And it requires some sensitivity, some analysis, some care, that careful, attentive approach, and not to push it, not to fight it, just to find the nice connecting points. That's the interest of Pallas. We have this idea in vibrational astrology that everything in astrology is a force. It's a force with a purpose. It's not just an as above, oh, you're like this because this is in your chart. It's a force, and that's the force of Pallas. That's what it's trying to do. And what our research has shown is that all of the objects in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter connect our personal lives with the larger social world. Let me show you an image on this slide. This is the asteroid belt. So what we see here is there's the dot in the middle, yellowish dot, that's the sun, of course, and then Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. And you'll notice that Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars are relatively close to each other, and then you start getting these big jump out to Jupiter. And in this relatively large leap from where the orbit of Mars is to the orbit of Jupiter, there are all these little things, relatively small things, we call asteroids, thousands of them. And they will stretch from Mars to Jupiter. Some of them are closer to Mars, some are closer to Jupiter. What this image is showing is where the great majority are. The great majority of them are roughly in the middle. But there are some that are closer in and some that are farther out. And you'll probably notice something else. What are these things over here in the lower left in the path of Jupiter? And they're in front of Jupiter and behind Jupiter. Those are called the Jupiter Trojans. And they're roughly about 60 degrees, although you can see from this image some are much closer and some much farther away. But on the average, about 60 degrees before and 60 degrees after Jupiter, the Trojans. And among asteroids that are within the orbit of Jupiter, this is the vast majority of them. There are other ones that moved in between orbits, but this is the great majority of them. And what I'm saying is that the asteroids in the asteroid belt not only are physically between Mars and Jupiter, but their energy process, their function, is to connect Mars and Jupiter. And basically what that amounts to is that Mars and all of these planets here, Mercury, Venus, Mars, are personal. They feel like us. We identify with them. Jupiter brings us out into a larger, more social, grander environment. And so these asteroids connect something personal with something on a social level. I've made the videos about Ceres, and you can refer to those to see how Ceres connects the personal world with the social world. Let me summarize it very briefly here. What Ceres does is it connects desire, impulse, needs, drives, and then tries to make them function well in society. How do we make sexual drives, for example, strong ambitions, all kinds of drives, needs, food. That's a need, hunger, thirst. Well, the social context makes a big difference. You can develop agriculture, etc. You don't have to do it by yourself. In love, romance, sexuality, children. How do we bring children into the world? All these issues are the issues of Ceres. The issue of Pallas is simply your talent, your gift. And how do we get that out? How do we develop it and share it? How do we make it circulate and benefit and participate in the world? Well, that's something we all want to know, isn't it? we all want to, we all want to bring those things out, and that's the interest of Pallas. And I'm going to show you the research. We're going to look at the charts in great detail, and we're going to see how it works. Okay, so before we continue, I'm giving you some idea of what Pallas is. It's one of those objects in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, and this is what it looks like. Over time, of course, astronomers get better and better pictures, and this is the current images, 2 different images of it. It's relatively close to being round. It's not perfectly round, but some asteroids are very far from being round. It's kind of roundish, and the latest photos show that it has these little dimples, I guess you'd call them. And so now some people are calling Pallas the golf ball asteroid. And it really does look a lot like a golf ball. So that's what it looks like. That's where it is between Mars and Jupiter. That's the basic idea of what it does. And like all of the other asteroids in the main asteroid belt, Pallas has something to do with connecting the personal world with the social world. So, okay, I think I've covered all of this, and I've shown you this. Oh, this is the last thing I want to show you. I think it's the last thing, and then we'll get into what Pallas does and explain that in more detail. And then we'll see charts of people, and we'll see how the research was done. What I'm showing you here is these are the asteroids with a diameter larger than 300 kilometers. So the diameter of the asteroid is 300 kilometers. Note, however, that measuring the diameter of an asteroid is a little tricky because most of them are not even close to being really round. So it's not like a ball. We have a clear diameter. So an average diameter in different directions is usually taken to get some sense of what the quote diameter is. And there are different ways of measuring that average. So you will see some slightly different values for the diameter of an asteroid depending on which table you look at. They won't be, tremendously different, but they can be, they'll be a little bit different. How do you measure the diameter of something that's not a ball, a sphere? No perfect way to do it. So here they are. Ceres, I put it in yellow, 939 kilometers is hugely bigger than the next two. What's interesting is that Vesta and Pallas are very close in size. I've even seen a few tables where they put Pallas as bigger than Vesta. It seems like they usually have Vesta bigger than Pallas, because I said the difficulty in measuring these things. But they're really, really close, 525, 511. So you have one huge asteroid in the asteroid belt, relatively huge, then two other big ones, and then a fourth one, Hygiea with 433, and then it jumps down to the 300s with Interomnia and Europa, and it starts having, you have a lot of them with 200 to 300 kilometers. So astrologers often talk about the four major asteroids, Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta. Frankly, I think that that's a misnomer. Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta are not the four major asteroids. The reason why they're called the four major asteroids is because they were the first four discovered. They are not the largest. The one that's not there is Juno. So even though Juno was discovered very early on, was one of the first asteroids discovered, it is not among the largest. And size is the big criterion, size and distance from the Earth. I mean, obviously, that's why we use the planets. That's why we use Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter. I mean, they're huge. And then you have these tiny little other things. So we are always basing what we interpret on the size and distance. So if something is big and close, in astrology, we've always assumed it's more important, and that has worked. So using that, which works brilliantly with the planets, the major asteroids are Ceres and then Vesta and Pallas. So Pallas is really important. I'm not saying the ones down here with a diameter of 200 to 300 are not important. Maybe for some reason they aren't nearly as important, but these are certainly conspicuous, certainly very important. So we want to understand the first four. They are the big ones. And you don't usually hear about Interomnia, Europa, but they are the next largest asteroids. So these are the ones with a diameter of over 300. So just to look at my notes here, note that Juno is not one of the big four. I would say if you want to have four major asteroids, substitute Hygiea for Juno. Now, we're not going to change the language of astrology, but really, Hygiea should replace Juno as one of the, quote, four major asteroids. And furthermore, 4 is a somewhat arbitrary cutoff point. We're going to get some more insight into this on the next slide. I'm going to show you an image of the asteroids to scale, and that'll give you some sense. See what you think about which ones are major. So Vesta and Pallas have nearly the same diameter, next largest, and I mentioned here that diameter is difficult to measure. The website I took this from, which is wikipedia.org/wiki list of exceptional asteroids, is using something called the geometric diameter. We don't need to go into technical details, specific what that is. It's just a way of measuring diameter. I think it's intuitively seems like the best way to measure diameter, but it's not that different from if you take the average or mean diameter. So, but I like this one. Okay, they all come out about the same anyway. Now, here you can look at it. When we say, let's go back to the previous slide. When we say, well, Vesta and Pallas are 500, in the 500s, Ceres is in the 900s, well, you say, well, it's only a little more than twice as big. But this is the diameter of something, and it's a bigger difference than you might think. Look at the difference. This is to scale. It's properly, represented here. Vesta and Pallas on this panel, this black background thing on the left, we see Vesta and Pallas up near the top. Look at them compared to compared to Ceres. And notice Ceres is round. When an object gets very large, it becomes round. This is just a fact. It becomes round. And sure enough, Ceres is big enough to be round. Also, when it gets big, it does what they call clear a path. There aren't a bunch of other objects that it has to like go in front of, pass by. So Ceres is close to being a planet. That's why it is called a dwarf planet. It has a lot of characteristics of planets, but not completely the same as a planet. And there's Vesta and Pallas. Now there's Hygiea, which happens to be very round, even though it's smaller. So sometimes an asteroid will be round even when it's not big. And there's Interomnia, Europa. Davida is, looks almost as big as Europa. And then you'll see gradually getting smaller. On the right side, we see even other ones. So, this gives you a good sense. And here's Juno, by the way. There's Juno right there. If you compare Juno to Vesta and Pallas, just visually you can see it. You can see my arrow here. I'm on the second to the bottom row, second column right there. That's a lot smaller than Vesta and Pallas. Way smaller. So really, Vesta and Pallas, if any asteroids are important, Ceres is like the mother of asteroids in the asteroid belt. It should have a kind of dominant, clear effect, and it does when you think about it. We'll talk about this later after we interpret, at least a half a dozen of these major asteroids. After we get at least through Europa and see what they mean, and then we can look at how they relate to each other. Bottom line, there's Pallas. Looks a little rounder than Vesta. They're about the same size. Those are really big. And I talked about what Pallas does already, and that is a fundamental important principle. So I'm trying to put this in perspective because often in astrology, I'm not seeing a lot of information about how astrology relates to the astronomy. People just pick up on the words and go with it. I think it's good to think about these things. Now, the meaning that we have for Pallas is based on the research, which I will get into shortly. The meaning of Pallas, according to astrologers, is also based on a kind of research, personally doing people's charts, and also inspired very much by the mythology. So here's an interpretation of Pallas. Oh, I forgot to give the source from this. I'm almost sure this was astrology.com. Sorry about that. Always like to give the source. It looks like I left it out. Okay, well, I'll read it to you anyway. I'll find the source and put it in the description. So Pallas, by the way, Pallas in mythology is often referred to as Pallas Athena. And so it's also Athena. Athena, this is the interpretation according to a website. I want to give you this because you'll hear this a lot. So let's talk about what other people are saying about Athena. Pallas, and then we will compare it to what we've come up with the research. There is some overlap, but a lot of differences as well. So according to this website, and a common idea among astrologers who work with asteroids, Athena demonstrates the ability to think for oneself, as well as the internal balance of active and receptive energies when head and heart combined. So there's it's a head and heart combination. Pallas Athena differs from Mercury in that there's less focus on linear thinking and planning, and which, by the way, in vibrational astrology, we don't think of Mercury as linear thinking and planning exactly, but that's okay. And focuses more on pattern recognition and other ways of knowing. In this way, Pallas is able to bridge intellect with intuition. Describe Pallas as being a strategist, a person willing to fight and to defend, and to be feminine and fierce at the same time. So our research indicates that this understanding of Pallas has a few elements of truth to it, but you're missing the essential purpose and function of Pallas. You're missing a lot of the sensitivity of it, the thoughtfulness. Pallas is not a warrior and fierce. So the whole tone of this, we think, is a little off base. There are some elements to it that are correct. I'm only going over this because you're going to hear about it, and it's like a literature review. This is what people are saying. We'll compare and contrast that to what we have found in the research using modern research methods. So let's talk a little bit more, and then I'll show you the results of the research and how the research was done. So this interest of Pallas in bringing your talents out, developing them, you might say negotiating them with the world. Pallas negotiates. It tries to find the interface. It doesn't force. Pallas doesn't force or fight. Pallas appreciates both the social context and the individual. That is really very important. Pallas sees the value of both. It tries to strike an integration. You could say a balance, but a better term would be integration of what you have and what the world has. They're both equally important, and they both need to find a meeting ground without sacrificing either one. That is the attitude of Pallas. It has a specific way that it's going to make the personal talents and the social context, they're going to meet together and work together nicely, and it's not easy. That's another assumption of Pallas. It's not easy. It requires thought, care, analysis, sometimes patience, sometimes a kind of wisdom. Not just looking at like little data and what's right in front of you. To sense and feel how to make that connection. So you see there is some similarity in the usual idea of Pallas, where they're saying it's heart and head, masculine and feminine together. In a way, that's kind of true. It's true. But it really helps to just think about what Pallas is doing and why it's that way. It makes it much clearer. Pallas is trying to bring your talents into the world by acknowledging they're both equally important and using the sensitivity to do that in a, you might say, delicate way. So Pallas is the master of bringing the innocence and purity within ourselves successfully into the world. Wow, that really captures the feeling. From Pallas's point of view, you're born with this. It's innocent, it's pure, it's untainted by the corruption and all the bad things that happen in the world. It's like a gift from God that we have this. I'm just saying this is how Pallas operates. I'm not saying these are objective truths. That's the perspective. That's the world Pallas is living in. It's sensing these pure, you could say divine gifts that were given. We can see, we can talk, we learn these things easily. Some children just go up and start playing piano. Some can learn languages. These gifts, they're pure. And Pallas wants to share them and develop them. And it's going to be difficult. It's usually kind of tricky. And that's the challenge of life. But Pallas is the master, because Pallas just prioritizes this as extremely important, is thinking about it, is feeling it, is sensing it. This is what it's attuned to, and it has the patience, and you might say a kind of holistic and wise approach to do it. That's what Pallas does. So another image of Pallas, just to feel the ways that this force takes form in life. You can also think of Pallas like a mother bird teaching the baby bird to fly. Pallas applies this attitude to oneself and life in general. Pallas is seeing the world as people having these gifts, born with them, but they're babies. They don't have the ability to explain what's going on, even to be clear about what's going on. They need coaching. They need assistance. And Pallas is interested in giving that assistance to make it possible. And Pallas does the whole thing. It recognizes the talent. It sees the gift. It sees the social context. And it's making that journey from the inner world up to Mars to the social world of Jupiter and Saturn. So it has this breadth to it, Pallas. So Pallas applies this attitude to oneself and life in general. It is a way of seeing the world. The Pallas perspective and purpose is everyone has precious and innocent qualities. Everybody. Maybe they've gotten covered over. We're all born with them. And they need to be brought out into the world. So in this process of bringing these talents and gifts to the world, what is Pallas's style? What is its approach? It tends to be thoughtful, pensive, like just quiet, thoughtful, careful. Well, it's thinking about it. It's pragmatic. It's practical. Pallas is not idealistic. It's not visionary. It's not anything like that. It is honoring. It is inspired. It has this desire, you might say, to almost protect and care for these precious talents. But it's pragmatic. How do we do it? How do we encourage people to develop their talents? And it's a big issue for children and young adults, but it's for everybody. You can be 40, 50, 60 years old. You're still changing. You have gifts. You have talents. You have new ones. You have new environments that you've entered into. How do you bring those out, develop them, and connect? So it applies to everyone, not just children, because we're all children in that sense. We're all growing, experiencing, changing, developing, and bringing out new things. So it is pragmatic, Pallas. Pallas is strategic, and it will compromise when necessary. It's not idealistic. It's not going to force. It's going to look at it practically. Oh, you have these talents, these gifts. What can we do? Because Pallas respects and honors the social situation equally with the individual. It doesn't look at the social situation as like an obstacle and, oh, we've just got to get you out there. No, it's balanced. We need to bring them together. So because of this sense of an equality between the social world and the individual, it's more about a delicate bringing together that Pallas is involved with. So Pallas is strong, very strong, because in that sense it's kind of almost fierce. It's got something important. We're going to do this. We can't let people's divine given gifts, they're precious. Nothing's going to stop this. So there's a fierceness, but it's very gentle in its execution. Very gentle, very supportive, because the perspective of Pallas is this is meant to be. And the world can assist and help and all work together. So Pallas is strong, but it's a gentle supportive force to help us bring our inner talents and motivation out into the world. Pallas tends to be cautious. It's not abrupt. It's not spontaneous. It's very often just quiet, just sitting, analyzing, thinking. It's very humble. You know, Pallas is overlooked. It's tremendously overlooked and underappreciated. It's the simple process of bringing it together in a way that is humble and not very dramatic. So Pallas is cautious, and this, by the way, before I continue, this is going to become clearer when I show you the example charts. So I'm prepping you and giving you some ideas. We're going to get this reinforced as we go deeper and see the actual images of Pallas. Okay, so Pallas is cautious. It's concerned about how the world can derail us from what is important, right? You've got to get your talent out there. Don't want to get derailed from that. But Pallas also sees the opportunities and benefits that the world brings. The world can be the good guy. Bringing them together. Your personal talent and the world. Pallas is a thoughtful strategist, weaving what we have into the social fabric. Weaves it right in there strategically. Pallas's feminine intelligence is sensitive to the complexities of situations. There is what you can call a kind of intuitive intelligence and sensitivity and holistic awareness, not dissecting in little pieces with Pallas. So that agrees with the modern interpretation of Pallas. There's also the combination of a fierceness and a gentleness. But when you understand it in the context of what Pallas is doing, then it's relevant to that process. And that's how those qualities kick in and exactly how they work. So it's a more specific interpretation than just saying, oh, it has, these combinations of qualities. So let's stop here. We're at 32 minutes. I'm going to stop here and because we're going to change the topic a little bit here. So let's pick up with this slide in part 2 of Pallas. Okay, thank you very much, my friends. God bless. Namaste.